So hi everybody, this is Steve Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we continue our discussions on emotional intelligence. And last time around we were trying to figure out where on the change grid does emotional intelligence naturally occur. And I'll refresh everyone's mind where that is. But how we got to the decision we came to was by looking at these different sorts of attributes or behaviors associated with emotional intelligence. We were able to identify where on the change grid those sorts of things naturally occurred. It was interesting how quickly a pattern kind of emerged. And so going to a composite diagram, one moment, we kind of said, emotional intelligence, it would include elements of 4 quadrants. And they kind of also encompass a great deal of what we know about the center of the change grid. But remember, the center of the change grid, the pure center of the change grid, you're completely detached from anything and everything. And so a lot of the things having to do with emotional intelligence involve interactions with others. So obviously that's not going to be at the center of the change grid. But there's a few things that were mentioned, particularly when it came to self-management, that would fall right smack dab in what we know of as the PowerPoint or the center of the change grid. But some of the things that were listed we felt resonated very nicely with the amiable driver kind of an energy, and some very much around the expressive driver kind of energy. There was even a few that were more of the driven expressive, and a few that were kind of like the amiable, no, scratch that, sorry, the analytical expressive. So creative problem solving, that sort of thing. Not being overwhelmed by a challenge that comes your way, but instead being more possibility oriented, et cetera. So we pretty much figured out, most of it falls right here. There was the occasional stray that we thought might be someplace else, but just want to bring it to your attention. That's 4 out of 16 energies that we could have talked about. So I was kind of curious to know your thoughts on whether or not what emotional intelligence is basically saying is that only 25% of the possible ways that humans could be responding to something, expressing themselves, behaving, etc., would fall into the domain of emotional intelligence. And what does that make everything else? I think David suggested emotional ignorance, or maybe part of it might be neglect. Some of it might be avoidance that's going around there. So anyway, just wanted to throw that all out. What do you guys think? Is emotional intelligence something that is a small subset of the full range of ways people should behave, could be behaving? Yeah, thoughts?
I have a tendency to think so. I look at emotional intelligence as being intentional and purposeful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of spots on the grid that on the change grid that are not in that way.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. Well, and I guess what I was wondering about is, does this seem to imply then that emotional intelligence is an essential part of who you are as a person? Or is it partially true that it's part of who you are as a person at your essence and your personality, etc.? And how much of emotional intelligence then is really a calculated, deliberate behavior that you basically learned, and you learned about social interaction, or you're just naturally good at social interaction. So I was wondering how much of this is actually attached to the essence of who you are, and how much of emotional intelligence is actually learned behaviors. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I think it's a combination, T, but I think a lot of it is learned.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think that, people are born with certain characteristics and competencies. Competencies indication that you develop those, but characteristics anyway. And I think that those allow us to find pathways in society that we can easily or more easily express ourselves. So I think it's a portion inherited or
Hmm. Hmm.
born with, and a portion learned.
Yeah. Yep. 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 And see, that would make it very different than IQ, because I think IQ is considered to be something that is primarily part of your genetic makeup. It's part of who you are, and certainly that isn't meant to suggest that people can't improve in their ability to gather and understand and utilize information. Or I mean, I think I hate the thought that you can't become more intelligent. I don't want to put that boundary on anybody. That being said, I think a great deal of intelligence is something that is part of your makeup. But when I looked at emotional intelligence, I went, a lot more of that is learned behaviors about what are societal norms. Where do you learn about courtesy? Where do you learn about controlling your own expression of whatever it is you're thinking and feeling? So to me, a lot of this was learned well at home, in school, in church, in business, and you learn these kinds of things. Um, right? Are we in agreement with that? This is all going someplace important, so I just need to know that you're on board before I throw out the real, the
Yes.
real stuff. Okay, all right. So, well then, looking at these other 12 areas on the change grid, then that would mean that either there, someone loses their emotional intelligence, or for whatever reasons, they're choosing not to apply or use whatever their emotional intelligence learnings happen to have been. And I think that opens up a very interesting dialogue when we're talking about the behavior of clients, because I mean, that's what we're all supposed to really be doing ultimately. So I look at this, I go like, the driven driver energy was not considered to be a place where emotional intelligence naturally occurs. Is that to suggest that this individual who is in a driven driver mode does not possess emotional intelligence? Or are what we're saying is that the driven driver energy somehow or another impacts um, our utilization of the emotional intelligence we otherwise possess?
Could it be a question of value, T? Because
Mhm.
some people that if you're that far out grid, I'm thinking of a guy that was a part of Direct TV. He was one of the directors. He didn't see value in him in emotional intelligence. He saw it all, and he was so driven, more like a drill sergeant, like you do because I say do, and without that bull in the china shop that you
Yep.
talk about. So if
Yep.
they don't see value in the emotional intelligence, they'll stay out there.
Right. And so then the question is that does that mean they don't have it, or that they are not using it, or have, and whether they've
They're not
chosen
using
not
it.
to use it for a long period of time? I think that's a very different explanation than they never had it to begin with. So are they lacking in emotional intelligence, or are they failing to use their emotional intelligence, or is it that they're unable to use their emotional intelligence when they're at certain places on the change grid?
That's what I would say, T. I think that, there are places on the change grid where emotional intelligence is engaging and activated, but there, like I said, there are a ton of other spaces on the change grid.
Yeah. And so, and I guess I'm bringing this up. Go ahead, Edie. Yeah, go everybody. Just go ahead, chime in.
Yeah, you know what? I go back to the Herman brain dominant stuff. I personally think it's how we're wired, and the lower right brain quadrant of the brain is a lot of the EQ stuff. And just working with kids and having my own children, I saw that at from the time they were born, which one was
Mhm.
more left brain and right brain, and can they learn? Can they adapt? Yeah, but it's not the same. It's like when you see some people like Wynton Marsalis playing his trumpet, he's one with the horn. And I think people who are wired for it are just naturals. And I'm thinking of my
Mhm.
granddaughter when she was 5 years old, sitting on the train with somebody getting her doctorate. And she could, and the woman, I said, look, I can take her away from you. She has such a high EQ, not IQ. She's the least of the family, but EQ. At 3, 4, 5 years old, she could talk to Queen Elizabeth and keep up a conversation.
Mhm.
So I honestly believe we're wired and we can make adaptations.
Mhm.
I will never be a good CPA. Can I learn a little bit more about numbers? Yeah.
Yep.
Will I ever be great? Because I am not wired that way. So I kind of believe it's how we're wired.
Yeah, and I would say that I think that that wiring is a gigantic contributor to the ease with which we move into, apply, utilize, live in an emotionally intelligent kind of a way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going back to Herman brain dominance, that lower right quadrant, um, one of the things I like about the Herman brain dominance model is that it says that every human being has a certain amount of activity in all four quadrants. There's,
Right.
you don't find an absolute void in an otherwise normal person. You wouldn't find an absolute void in one of those quadrants, but it could be greatly, what am I going to say, overwhelmed by activity in other quadrants. Is that fair to say? You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
because my thought is, if I go back to this driven driver, and by the way, the reason why I'm talking about a driven driver is that when I think about emotional intelligence as a business, so providing emotional intelligence training or providing emotional intelligence coaching and consulting services, who is the targeted audience for that? You guys tell me, who, when you think about driver, expressive, amiable, analytical, who are we trying to really work with and say, oh my gosh, we got to get some emotional intelligence going for these people? Who are these people that are this targeted audience for emotional intelligence?
Drivers,
I think a
Yeah.
lot of them are the driven drivers
right?
Mm-hmm.
because they're all the
They
China
laugh.
shops.
But
Mhm.
T, I was thinking like the example I was just speaking about, the one guy, it's situational and task specific as well. Because just because he
Yes.
acts that way in front of his subordinate, if he was in the presence of one of the C-suite, it'll be a different guy. You
There you
mean, he'll
are.
speak of them different. It's like the light switch for emotional intelligence clicks on depending upon whose presence he's in front of.
You're absolutely right. And that's what I wanted to kind of get to with this driven driver. I believe those driven drivers may have no innate understanding of emotional intelligence, but I know that their mom raised them to be polite. I know that over the course of their lifetime, they had people that were giving them lessons, poorly absorbed though they might have been, were giving them lessons about how to carry themselves properly. And to Chris's point, we see that evidence. If we take that bull in the china shop, business owner, leader, whatever, and we say, you need funding. And so we're going to put you in front of people who have got the money that you desperately need. Why do I think they might suddenly find some emotional intelligence then?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the circumstances, the environment, the whatever, the values, going back to I think what Chris said, the values that they're associating with that interaction, and then put them in front of the regular employees, and they choose not to apply whatever their emotional intelligence stuff is. I think, first of all, because being emotionally intelligent or behaving in emotionally intelligent ways is work for them. It's not their natural way of being. It's not whatever was innate for them. It's instead something they learned how to do. And can they do it? Yes. Do they want to do it? Well, it all depends. But boy, is it work for them to do it. And so when they don't have to do it, they toss it aside and they become whatever that dominating energy happens to be.
So T, can we link tension and emotional intelligence?
That's my thought. That's what I've always wanted to go here is like, I get it that emotional intelligence is in part, perhaps in large part, something that is innate. And some people have it and some people never will. I also believe that there is an opportunity for everyone to become trained to be more emotionally intelligent, because I believe that training has been going on for their entire lifetime. But now we get to this part about circumstances demanding it and choices being made when the tension isn't really driving it. So, for example, if it's going to be completely tension driven, that would imply that as tension goes up, I become more emotionally intelligent. Well, first thing, if you guys are looking at the screen for a second, if I'm down grid, way deep down in apathy, Why might the analytical type in general and the analytical type in specific either not be innately emotionally intelligent or not be applying their emotional intelligence? So what's going on with the analytical energy that would in any way go, well,
Well,
that's not where
they just don't care.
they don't care. they're, they're in a situation where their ability is perceived as being extremely high. The challenge is very, very low. Are they in a circumstance that's demanding that they be emotionally intelligent?
No.
No.
They feel like
Um,
they can turn it on when necessary at
when
any point in
necessary.
time. Mhm.
And when you're this far down grid, these activities are not requiring it. So why put the
Mhm.
energy into it? Why put the energy into it?
Mm.
It's always why I believe that, universities do a really poor job of helping kids understand their own competencies and characteristics and what kind of professions and careers match with those. Because if you sat me in front of a computer and asked me to do spreadsheets all day long, I'd commit suicide in
Yeah,
about 36 hours.
there you go.
But then put me in a room full of people and say, get to know them, and I'm fine for 36 hours.
Yeah. Yep. Mhm. Yeah. And so it is part innate, but it's that whole idea about energy. So if I said, okay, I'm by nature a downgrid person, and as much as I love people, I mean, I'm an INTP. INTP lives somewhere down in that whole analytical quadrant, if you want to find its home base. Um, and so I don't want to suggest that I don't like people. I do like people, and I don't want to suggest that I don't have friends or don't want friends or whatever. I do have friends and I do want friends or whatever. Um, but I have to say that
Mm.
in general terms, people wear my last nerve. So, people exhaust me. And so I can't handle big crowds of people. At parties, I have a limited capacity for time spent in a kind of a large social sort of a setting. And I tell you this for certain, when I do get home, all I need is absolute silence and a closed door and leave me alone. So this has always been something I've been aware of because being up on stage speaking and traveling the world doing speaking engagements, large audiences. You guys all know after a successful speaking engagement, everybody wants a piece of you. They want to, whether they're just well wishers or whether they have questions for you, or they want to go and do something social, come to dinner with us, whatever it is. I find that totally exhausting. I just want to say to them, I'm glad I was here. I'm glad you found value in what I did, but now I got to go away. So, all right, can you guys relate to that?
Yep.
And so in that moment, I would say, wow, am I really demonstrating any emotional intelligence? Or is the truth that emotional intelligence would seem to imply that because there are people who want to have that kind of contact with me, that somehow or another I should rise to that occasion. I should set aside whatever's going on with me personally and instead be emotionally intelligent.
Well, that's hypo awareness. So I don't even think sometimes people get it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because you're that far down grid. It's
Yeah.
off the radar. It's not there. So again, it's not to suggest that the person doesn't have any emotional intelligence. It's that for whatever reasons, the circumstances or a choice is being made not to do that. Now, to David's point about tying emotional intelligence to attention, as I go from being an analytical to an expressive analytical, something is changing within me energetically. That whole expressive piece is coming along. And the moment I'm expressing, um, a lot of expression involves other people being part of whatever's going on then, or might be the targeted subject of whatever is going on there. Somehow or another, people have now become involved. Now, I'm still downgrid, so this might just all be about planning and developing and strategizing. But I'm planning, developing, and strategizing with some people element kind of involved, some kind of feeling or sensation, something that I'm trying to communicate or trying to express, if you will. So my tension may very well be awakening that period where I really am now factoring in how this might be received, how it is being received, whether that's good, bad, right, or wrong. What can I do about it? How do I better package messages? That sort of thing. I think there's a little bit now of a request being made internally for that emotional intelligence to come forward. Are you with me so far?
Yep.
Yep.
But
Now,
T,
yep.
isn't it always, I mean, with stress, whether you were talking about the disc or Herman brain dominance, whatever, with tension, I always thought people went back to their natural place. Okay. With tension, I can talk my way out of a speeding ticket because I go into charm. But somebody who's analytical, when they're under tension, they're pulled over, they freeze. I mean, they go into more
They
analysis.
they might.
Yeah.
We need to make a distinction between
Yeah.
tension and stress. Certainly
Okay.
someone who is naturally upgrid, an expressive person, has a stronger natural capacity to handle stress than someone who is by nature an analytical, withdrawn, whatever kind of a person, because the amount of activity that an upgrade person is exposed to is naturally greater than the amount of external activity a downgrade person is exposed to. The downgrade person may be absolutely overwhelmed with internal activity, but not external activity. So you kind of get the idea. If I'm upgrade and I get pulled, and I'm talking about an upgrade personality type, and I get pulled over by the cops, well, I don't know that I'm going to be way up in stress, but I'm certainly going to have a heightened level of productive tension. I'm going to be in upper power or power stress. And this is where I may very well turn on the charm and be very personable and smiling and all those sorts of things that come along as part of emotional intelligence, because in that circumstance, that you may need to pull in some of that in order to best position yourself for a more favorable outcome in that dialogue. But you're not up in stress. That's not a stressful situation, unless you still have those guns and drugs in the car. That might be different. Now that could be a stressful situation, and but then emotional intelligence is probably going to fly out the window, and you're going to stop being aware of how you're presenting yourself. Stop being aware of controlling the way that you're displaying whatever your emotions happen to be. If you're frightened by being pulled over for whatever reasons, I'm sure you're going to be fidgety and your eyes are going to have a lot of movement. And the police have been trained to look for those kinds of signals. What's going on? Don't act nervous. Don't be nervous. So, and yeah, so there you go. Now that gets to my progression of saying tied to tension. Even though the expressive analytical is not really in this domain of where we said emotional intelligence probably naturally resides on the change grid, they're starting to get a whisper of it. It's starting to come into play. And then they move upgrid a little bit more. And now we find active emotional intelligence behaviors coming into play. But if they go further upgrid, is the expressive very emotionally intelligent?
No.
No, why?
They're like the submarine going at full speed, running over a stereo, blaring at full sound. They don't hear it.
Yeah, exactly. They're so consumed by whatever is threatening them or occupying them in the moment. Are they paying that much attention to other people around them? And again, I always make the exception if it's a parent and their kids are there. I get it. There's a very different instinct that's coming into play then. But generally speaking, if someone is upgrid and it's about our life situation, I don't think they're going to concern themselves all that much with social graces. So all right. So David, does that kind of demonstrate the point you were making about, is there a relationship between the utilization of emotional intelligence or the demonstration of emotional intelligence and tension?
Yeah, I think that, the thing that happens to me, and I don't know that it happens to everybody else. When I hear the word stress, I place a value judgment on it. Tension, because I've done this for 30 years, I place no value judgment on whatsoever. It's simply a matter of fact.
Yes.
Mhm.
The person has X amount of tension, is
Right.
experiencing X amount of tension.
Level of physical, emotional, and intellectual activity. No
That's
value
right.
judgment, just reaction, just reality.
Yeah. Yep. And even when we're then using the label of stress for that highest level of tension, we know that it's experienced differently by different people. And it's very contextual. So, is stress a thing, or is stress a word that we use to simply describe heightened levels of tension? So yeah. Now we could also apply this if we're going to look at, is there a connection between tension and emotional intelligence? Let's talk about the horizontal axis. So what is the resulting vector when we are looking horizontally? So when you look at your ratio between perceived ability and perceived challenge, vertically, it's telling about your level of tension. What's it telling you about you horizontally?
Engagement.
Engagement or drive. So yeah, anything like that, involvement, anything like that works really, really well horizontally. And so when someone is very far in grid, where drive is very low, awareness is very low, there's no engagement, none of that is really happening, do you believe that you're going to encounter all that much emotional intelligence other than what the person might naturally possess?
No.
No, let them move out grid to being a driven, amiable, and now they have a little bit more purpose, but involved in whatever it is they're thinking about and doing, etc. And so, there's an intention that's just not really formulated yet, because you have to be a little bit further out grid to formulate your intention, but at least you have the intention to work on your awareness. Because I'm moving, and I'm moving from being unaware to being aware of what's going on. Am I doing that intentionally? I don't know if consciously it's intentional, but something caught my attention. Remember when we talked about curiosity and how a lot of it is an instinct that's driving us to just look a bit more closely at something so we can decide whether or not it's important to us or threatening to us or whatever the actual case may be. So yeah, so I think that we're there. Now you get to a certain point, and again, you're that amiable driver. The amiable energy wants to care about somebody. I can certainly see how now you are an amiable driver. You've moved more horizontally out grid. Now you're in one of those quadrants we talked about, where emotional intelligence is either naturally found or has good reason to be activated. And then, unfortunately, as I move further and further out grids, particularly in the danger zone, there is a little bit of the driven driver that still might be a little bit emotionally intelligent. But I know as I move further out grid, it's falling by the wayside. So if we say as tension goes up, we find kind of a sweet spot, and as the drive goes up, we find a little bit of a sweet spot, find where those sweet spots kind of overlay, and lo and behold, we're in that area of the change grid yet again. So, all right, thoughts about that?
That would seem to indicate that emotional intelligence is a purposeful action.
Emotional intelligence is a purposeful action. Yes, that's my belief, is that while there may be an innate amount of emotional intelligence that people possess, and certain personalities tend to just kind of naturally operate in those sorts of social, interactive kinds of ways, I think that emotional intelligence is something that people selectively choose to be, or can selectively choose to demonstrate. And it may or may not be a natural sort of a state for them, or yeah. Yeah. Okay,
Hey, T,
so
do you see a difference from, I guess, how we're approaching this from the point of emotional intelligence for yourself versus emotional intelligence so that you can get along and work with other people inside of a workplace?
well, and to that, I would say we could produce several different activity lists around the subject of emotional intelligence behaviors and see how ready someone is, ready, willing, able, etc. How are they currently responding to that? So I could choose certain activities that would be about my personal emotional intelligence. I'll give you an example of this. I was working out with my trainer, and the client that he works with before my session starts is one of these people who, I don't know how or why, but he is always upset about everything. The vast majority of things that have no application to him whatsoever. So he's very upset about cruise ships requiring vaccinations in order for passengers to get on board. And he's talking all about, it violates our rights and blah, 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 blah. And I mean, the man is ranting about this. Now, he doesn't understand that there are a lot of other factors that come into play when you're looking specifically at the cruise industry, not the least of which is the fact that many of the countries that cruise ship is going to visit have very strict guidelines about who they will allow into their country and whether or not they will even allow the ship to dock there. And a couple of the Caribbean ports say you can only come here if you can prove that 95% of the passengers are vaccinated and 98% of the crew. If you cannot prove that, you can't even stop in our port, which means you can't refuel and you can't get any supplies. And so it's not about whether or not we as Americans should be subjected to having to prove that we have anything going on for us. We're talking about a specific, unique situation. Well, he's got no room for that in his head. He's just going, that no one can make you do that. I don't care where you are on the bus, ranting. To me, he's demonstrating a total lack of individual emotional intelligence. He's allowing himself to become very upset by things that are nothing more than conceptual to him. He's not experiencing it. He's never been on a cruise. He's not planning on going on a cruise. In fact, he has never left the United States. And so this is where I think, to your point, there is a lot of emotional intelligence behaviors, factors that are very much something that applies at the individual level. So why do some people get upset in certain circumstances and other people just let it, go floating on by? So yeah, I think we could build a very useful activity list for our clients when we're working with them individually. In fact, even as part of the oracle of the self, I think that we could be integrating some of these concepts of emotional intelligence and all that good sort of stuff as tools and techniques for getting along. Now we get to your other point. Well, what about now when we're talking about interacting with other people? Well, I could create an activity list for interactions at home with family members, interactions with friends, interactions with non-business related social situations, business related social situations where I'm with a team of people that I already know and know me, versus business situations where I'm at a group where I don't know the people and they don't know me. So I think there's a lot of different scenarios in which emotional intelligence could prove to be useful, but its usefulness and how it ends up getting deployed could be very different depending on which of those scenarios we happen to be looking at. Did that answer your question?
And it did. It made me think about an emotional intelligence 360.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of those out there, particularly for the people that are doing it in business settings. Yeah. Do you guys believe that someone who's lacking in emotional intelligence is in a good position to evaluate somebody else's emotional intelligence?
No.
Right. So this is what I've always wondered about 360s. I mean, I get it. They're very popular, and I'm sure they've got a lot of really good value depending on which one you're looking at and how it's being utilized. But I just kind of go like, do we ever really scrutinize the evaluators? Or are we just hoping to have sufficient evaluators that any of their biases and whatever are blind spots are somehow compensated for because of others that are involved.
VP,
Yeah.
when I do 360s, I go over the rater list with both my participant and his immediate manager, because it's easy to load up your rater list with people that'll pat you on the back,
Yeah.
but not with the right people.
Right. And so you need to do that. And a lot of the 360s do end up having a limited number of evaluators.
Yeah.
But as technology has allowed us to open the doors wider and be more inclusive as far as the number of people participating, I've actually seen 360s on a group of, let's say you've got a department and the department has got 24 people in it, where every one of those 24 people evaluate the other 23 people. And because the technology allows now them to process that amount of data. Well, that's when you kind of go to what David's point is. Inside of any kind of those groupings, you're always going to have people that are your cheerleaders, and always there's always going to be someone who wants to cut you down a peg. So do those balance out and neutralize one another, or does it end up contaminating the overall result? So yeah, so there are 360s that are involved. I think it's very interesting to always go, how does someone perceive themselves versus how are others perceiving them? And certainly from a developmental perspective, I can see how that could be useful. Even if I'm looking at a 360, let's say we're working with a corporate leader, and they think they're just great and everyone around them thinks they're just, lousy. I say, your perception of self is that you're really great. And for whatever reasons, their perceptions of you is that you're not. So where do you think their perceptions are coming from? What do you think is motivating them to share this particular perspective? Well, they're just out to get me. Okay, why are they out to get you? What is it that they believe you are doing, and blah, blah, blah. So even if to me, the 360 could be questionable as far as the bias of people filling it out, in my work, it's really all just about initiating dialogue. I mean, I'm not going to decide who to hire and who to fire and who to promote based on a 360.
Never.
Yeah, no, it's just, it's one little glimpse into one little thing, and it's got some benefits to it and it's got some real blind spots to it. So use it appropriately and see where we end up. Okay, so there's a little chart I wanted to show you guys if you're open to this. It's this one right here. Now, I don't know where this came from. Again, I found all these really interesting little charts and diagrams, but most of them have no attributions. What's that?
I think that's Genos.
I think this is Genos too, but I couldn't see anywhere where it was actually, labeled as such. But I just kind of felt like I'd seen this before. So they were basically saying, all right, well, there's these core emotional intelligence competencies, and they came up with 6 of them. Up to now, we've been looking at 4, maybe 5. So I always think it's interesting when people select kind of a group and go, no, we can expand upon that. It's like, thank you, Goldman, for starting this really work. It's time for us to expand upon it. That's great. Wonderful. Have at it. So they came up with these 6 core emotional intelligence competencies, and they're talking about self-awareness, blah, blah, blah. You can see the list as well as I can. And then they're talking about that each of these competencies could be viewed along a bit of a continuum, I'll say. And that continuum for like self-awareness can range from being disconnected to being present. For awareness of others, from being insensitive to empathetic. Authenticity, untrustworthy to genuine. And you see the rest of them. We can actually play with all these. Now, as I saw these and I thought about them as being continua, the first thing that kind of struck me is I don't know that I'm looking at a complete continuum for any one of these. Like I would say, disconnected may certainly be one of the ways that self-awareness might express itself in an unproductive kind of way, or if you're not good at it, you could appear to be disconnected. But is there something that's even more unproductive than just being disconnected? I mean, where is self-loathing where does that come into play? Where does, some of the other ones, and productive state, to be present, is that really the best productive state? Is that the ultimate achievement? You are done with self-awareness when you can be present. So and just at quick glance, I went like, I see the continuum, but I think there's more things that would be unproductive or even more unproductive in terms of states. And I think there are even more productive states that are shown here, but I get it. I kind of get it. Do you guys, can you meet me where I am as far as that concern?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's all good. I'm not saying it's wrong. The other thing I thought was, well, we describe the center of the change grid as being a place of total detachment. What's the difference between being detached and being disconnected when it comes to self-awareness? So, yeah, I'll let you guys throw out an answer there. What do you think the difference is between being disconnected and being detached?
Would it be being detached? You still could be an observer. We're disconnected. You're not interested even in observing it, or you're not caring about it at all.
Yeah, that was the distinction I wanted to make, was that I believe that one of the most powerful self-awareness competencies is the ability to disconnect from something, to detach oneself, so that if I'm self-aware, let's say I'm in a heated, I'm in a situation where there's a heated argument going on, multiple people are involved, I'm sitting at a conference table or whatever. I am in this moment. I need to become self-aware in that moment so that I can kind of decide, well, as part of that, I almost need to disconnect. I need to detach myself so that I can observe myself. How am I feeling in this argument? What am I thinking in this argument? Before I just suddenly launch into expressing all that. So I believe that part of self-awareness is having the ability to detach. And I find myself using the word disconnect from whatever's going on in that moment long enough to detach myself. Because if I'm connected in that moment, what's my likelihood of being able to detach myself if I'm connected?
Very low.
In fact, isn't that just a rearrangement of the word to say de-attach? Isn't that really what detach means? De-attach yourself. So attach and connect, isn't that the same word? So, so I just had a little bit of a question mark around that. So now if you're saying like, oh no, if you're totally disconnected with when it comes to understanding yourself, you have no understanding of yourself whatsoever. I don't know that disconnected is really telling that story. Got that? Yeah, you guys agree?
What else would you put in there?
Well, I think that there is an element of, I want to say maturity that might be involved. There may, because a lot of this might be training, I might seem to be disconnected, where the truth is I've never been taught how to connect. I was never taught to pay attention to what I'm thinking and feeling and how I happen to be responding internally and externally at a particular moment. Maybe that was never something that was emphasized for me. And so I think that self-awareness involves an element of unawareness. And that unawareness might be accidental, incidental, as opposed to what I'm looking at here, which makes me feel a little bit like I'm deliberately in this unproductive state. Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. So, okay, I think most, if not all of you guys on the call are parents. So did you have to do any work at helping your children to develop self-awareness?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What word would you use to describe what they were before they were self-aware? I mean, I know unaware, and I know part of me wanted to say they were clueless. But it might also be that maybe they didn't understand that self-awareness carries with it a certain amount of value for oneself, a certain amount of esteem one holds for oneself. So again, you guys that are parents, I'm not a parent, I've raised cats.
Yeah,
Cats
I
cats
think
never pay
too, with
attention.
sharing toys and going to grocery stores and play dates and uh, just general trips outside the house, that parents do a lot of work with their kids when they're
Mm-hmm.
2, 3, 4 years old on self-awareness.
Yep. Yep. And so that's why we kind of go like, so I don't really know that I'm disconnected, but in all fairness, because I couldn't find the attribution, I didn't have the opportunity to go and research what the person who put this together means by this unproductive state of being disconnected. In the narrative that accompanies this diagram, I'm sure there could be very um, deep explanation of what they mean by each of these 18 different words that are scattered around on this. Now, at the other end of things, a productive state would be to be present. And when I think of being present, I think that I'm in the moment, I'm of the moment. I'm actively listening to what's going on. I'm actively aware of what I'm thinking and feeling. Now, I don't want to talk about other people yet because that's the next one. So present seems to be an accurate label for that. But I want to take it up another level and say, I'll say it to you guys as a question. Let's assume for a second that you are fully and completely present. Okay, are you done when it comes to self-awareness?
Well,
Present is enough?
probably leads to some kind of proactivity.
Something proactive. And so I'm getting now prepared. So I'm becoming more, again, I'm fully self-aware. I'm fully present. Okay, I'm there. Am I done? I don't think so. I think that the reason why this evaluation is even occurring is because I'm going to be saying or doing something, or I'm going to be expected to say or do something, or I have an opportunity to say or do something. Well, what then in that still world of self-awareness is beyond presenting something? Is it about being able to understand myself enough that I can package myself, my thoughts, my feelings in a way that is genuine, although they put authenticity even further down the list there. But nevertheless, you get the idea. I think there's something that's beyond simply being present. So even if I look at their productive states as a set, so I want to, think of you guys to describe yourselves in these ways. You are present. You are empathetic. You are genuine. You are expansive, resilient, and empowering. Yay, that's all really, really good. Am I done or am I ready? Some of these feel very doing, like empowering is the first one that's actually in a verb form.
Well, empathetic.
Empathetic, um, yep, empathetic. I'm being empathetic, yeah. So I look at these and I kind of go like, well, this is a wonderful state to achieve, but I have achieved this state for what reason? Just because this is a better place to be, or because this state now is preparing me, enabling me, allowing me to do what?
I think all of these are doing, and I think it's a matter of selecting the one that's appropriate at the time.
Okay, tell us more about that.
Well, I think someone who is emotionally intelligent has capacity, capability.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's a judgment call, but I think that if they truly are emotionally intelligent, then they're able to choose a tool or a path or an objective from this list to execute,
Yeah.
depending on the situation.
Right. And so that's where I'm glad you said it, because that's what I wanted to get back to, was this idea about those 4 quadrants that are subquadrants that we've kind of looked at. When I look at something like, well, where on the change grade is someone most present?
Let's
Where's
say it's PowerPoint.
at the PowerPoint, at the center, this is where I'm most present. If I look at the next one, where am I going to be most empathetic? I'm going to be most empathetic. And again, I'm being empathetic. That means I'm actively engaging with somebody who needs some empathy. To
Power to
me,
power stress.
power to power stress. Yep, yep, yep. And I think it's going to be right here in that amiable driver. I'm being empathetic. There's an objective in mind, and it's an objective with an amiable, a strong amiable energy. So I can kind of go like, well, okay, empathy kind of lives right here. I can connect with people and do all that. I mean, further in grid where I'm a driven, amiable, I can certainly say I can feel what they're feeling, but I may do nothing with that feeling. So I think this whole idea about being empathetic, there's a reason why I'm being empathetic. Where am I most authentic? Where am I most genuine on the change grid? Authentic and genuine.
The center.
More on the center, maybe an amiable driver, because I'm probably going to be authentic because there's some subject in discussion. I'm being more genuine because something is going on there. That's why I'm always going like, I'm in the center, but I got to be leaning some sort of way so I can feel that leaning. If I look at expansive, which is emotional reasoning, being able to see things, now I think we could be talking about the driven expressive, the expressive driver. These are expansive ways. Even the analytical expressive, this is about expansion, rather to solve a problem, to move something forward. So definitely that kind of expansiveness lives there. Again, the driven driver is also expansive, but they're kind of plowing through the field. Resilient, well, this one I know for certain. Resilience lives right here on the change grid. It's an adaptive skill. So it's a little bit of all of these, really. So I know that's where that one lives. And the last one was empowering. Well, I'm empowering when I'm kind of like this expressive driver and maybe even an amiable driver, whether I'm being very gentle and individual, trying to empower an individual, or maybe I'm trying to empower a full team, a full group, or whatever. So maybe that could even be a little bit further upgrade than all that. So I just go to say, I wanted to show you this just so I could say that even though we may have a lot more discussion around what an even more productive state might be when we look at these 6 competencies, these productive states all seem to echo what we've been saying earlier. They live in this general region of the change grid. Okay, we're at the top of the hour. So thoughts? Is this interesting? Is this getting to be too much?
It'd be good to see it on the change grid if you could plot some of that.
Yeah, we certainly can. Maybe we can do that for Thursday. Thursday, I'd like to finish this all up because just like I said, we could find where these productive states are. It might be interested to now look at all the unproductive states and let's see, where do those live? Where's the continuum? And for example, I'll give you this one about the awareness of others. Well, if I want to just talk about awareness of others, I might even be able to say, and I'm not saying this is where we're going to end up, but I might be able to say that it starts on the in-grid side of things. And as we move further and further out-grid, I become less and less aware of others. What are they calling it? Being insensitive to others. I might be very insensitive to others if I'm too far out-grid. I could also be very insensitive to others, maybe not such an outward way, down-grid. Maybe even up-grid, but up-grid I'm kind of just acting out. Where if I'm too far out-grid and I'm being insensitive, I could be being cruel and punishing and, vicious and all those sorts of things. Where up-grid, it's just your emotions have gotten the best of you and you're just acting out. It's a little bit of a different kind of, again, these are neighbors when it comes to bad behaviors. So I'd be very curious to see, well, do these unproductive states reside in all the other areas of the change grid. Yeah, and are they in danger zones? So where are they? Where do they begin? Where do they end? Where does this vector kind of live, overlay on the change grid?
Hey T, I can't help but see the connection from the conversations about the media, seeing the dark side of this, how armed with this information in the hands of the media, they use it to manipulate and move people.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. We don't necessarily need to limit it just to the media. We can limit it to anyone who has an agenda, where within that agenda, they're trying to get you to somehow or another hand over your power, hand over your control or whatever. I would say to you that where they don't want you to be are in these productive states.
Right.
They want you to be over here. And depending on what their agenda happens to be, maybe it is about cultivating a belief that things are highly limited, or cultivating indifference, cultivating insensitivity, a lack of trustworthiness. So that's what I'm kind of wondering, and I'm glad you brought that up. We're talking about trying to help people to become more emotionally intelligent. Don't believe for one moment that that's everybody's agenda.
Right.
Some people want you to become emotionally, I keep wanting to say stupid, but that's not fair. It's not emotionally clueless, emotionally,
Detached.
manipulated, detached. Yeah, something else that's going on that just says for our agenda to work, I can't afford for you to be in a productive state. I need
Right.
to move you into and keep you in unproductive states. And now if you look at the change grid, you got to believe all 4 danger zones would be my ultimate destinations. You are far more controllable and manipulatable and all those otherables if you are out in these extremes. I am terrified of anyone who's at the PowerPoint, anyone who's in power in general, and anyone who's even got a little bit of power stress because they are actively taking issue with what I'm saying. And the people that are downgrid, a little bit downgrid, are building the case, that analytical element, those fact checking kinds of things, that's here on the change grid. So whether I'm fighting or whether I'm documenting or whether I'm just out of, they don't want me to be here. This terrifies them. By the way, they'll very often tell you that what they're doing is moving you to here. But if you really examine the behaviors, the techniques, and the underlying motivations, you'll find that the opposite is true. They don't want you to be in this healthy, thoughtful place of self-control and self-esteem. It does not help their agenda for you to be there. So, yeah, so terrible as it may sound, just assume everyone has got an agenda and proceed accordingly. There you go. There you go. You don't think for yourself by repeating what others have said. So there you go. Okay. With that, we'll pick up where we left off on Thursday. So thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye for now.